This is Detour, the best stories in Black travel.
Peace, beautiful people. Come journey with me around the world as I shine a light on stories about music, community, and resistance. This is Excursions with Gina Arias. On the eve of my mother's 75th birthday, my partner Fred Ones and I traveled down to Florida for the festivities. I spoke with my mom about her life as she sat on the cusp of this milestone celebration. Born in the Dominican Republic in 1946, her childhood and early adolescence were spent living under the brutal dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. As a young man, Trujillo spent 12 years in the Dominican National Guard and was trained by the U.S. Marines, which occupied the Dominican Republic from 1916 to 1924. He took power in 1930 under dubious elections, wherein all other candidates dropped out of the race under constant harassment by the army. Almost immediately upon descending to the presidency, he implemented martial law. He soon made his political party the sole legal party. Any adult stopped by police in the street without a membership card could be arrested for vagrancy. In 1936, Santo Domingo was renamed Ciudad Trujillo, Trujillo City, and a large electric sign simply stating God and Trujillo was erected. The highest mountain peak in the Dominican Republic and his home province, San Cristobal, were both renamed Trujillo. Besides narcissistic, Trujillo lived under the delusion of white supremacy. He was said to powder his face to try to appear lighter, and was vehemently anti-Black and anti-Haitian. His barbarism in this regard culminated in October of 1937 with the massacre of approximately 35,000 Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent, primarily along the northwestern border dividing the two countries. Although my mom was quite young at the height of his violent reign, she recalled some aspects vividly.
Things that I remember, like when my parents used to listen to the radio station from out of the country, they were very quiet and they were in the bedroom, and nobody knew that they were listening to something different than what the broadcast in the Dominican Republic were saying, because that was forbidden. So I would go and try to listen at the beginning because I didn't know what they were listening to, and I was really screamed at and said, "Get out of here, this is not for you." And then later I learned that they were listening to things that against the dictatorship.
At the root of that anger expressed by my grandparents was undoubtedly fear. Understandable, since every institution was subjugated to Trujillo's power. Churches were made to post the slogan, "God in heaven, Trujillo on earth." And even private homes were required to visibly demonstrate their allegiance.
My house had a picture of Trujillo. Everybody had to have it.
What did it say?
En esta casa, Trujillo es el jefe. In this house, Trujillo is the boss.
Anyone who dared to oppose him was never to be heard from again, like Jesus de Galindez, a Spaniard who had fled to the Dominican Republic in 1939 following the rise of Spanish dictator Francisco Franco. Galindez became critical of Trujillo and fled to New York City for safety, where he wrote his doctoral thesis about Trujillo's vicious regime. Nevertheless, he could not escape Trujillo's reach.
You know where they got him?
Where?
At a subway in Manhattan. He was teaching at Columbia University. He left his class and was going to take the subway home. And some people came picked him up. There was an American pilot, and there were some Dominican people there, and they just picked him up like if they were the FBI or whatever. That's what they made pretend that they were picking him up from here. They put him on a plane and they brought him to the dictator Trujillo.
What happened after that is not known for certain, as his body was never found. But my mother repeated an often told version of the events that transpired next.
Oh, Trujillo made him eat the book that he wrote, because he wrote a book against the family, and he put the book in him and told him eat it and put it in his mouth, and then they brought the sharks and make him, the sharks eat him.
I grew up hearing this gruesome tale. Dissidents were often fed to sharks far from the coast in the deep sea, or murdered on quiet stretches of country roads. But despite his bloodthirsty reign, not everyone was in opposition to it. This we learned when we sat down with Fred's father, affectionately known as Big Freddy, when we traveled back to New York City. Born the same year as my mother, he nevertheless had a very different experience at home with regard to the Trujillo regime.
Mi papá era trujillista. My father, he was a follower of Trujillo. So everybody had to be agree with nothing against Trujillo.
It's hard to know whether people who supported him did so out of self-preservation or genuine respect. Although he violently stamped out opposition and ordered massacres, he also played the role of benevolent provider, which may have endeared him to some people.
And he used to bring things for the poor people, not that he was taking them out of poverty, but, anyone who talk about Trujillo he was El Jefe, and, you would talk to people and say, oh, they killed someone because said something bad about Trujillo. And these people would say, so why did he say something bad about Trujillo?
El Jefe, the boss. The United States government turned a blind eye to over 3 decades of totalitarian dictatorship led by El Jefe. Remember that all of this occurred in the midst of the Cold War, where the United States' focus was on destabilizing left-leaning and socialist movements and governments. But eventually, even the United States could not tolerate the Trujillo regime. The CIA provided material assistance for the assassination of Trujillo in 1961, as a U.S. congressional investigation revealed years later. Big Freddy talked to us about the immediate post-Trujillo period.
When Trujillo was killed, everybody was like, everything ended. After they killed Trujillo, it's like, this is going to be a disaster, right? So it gave us a feeling of a little bit of scare, and you don't know what was going to happen. Uncertainty. That's basically what happened.
Uncertainty abounded across the Dominican Republic following Trujillo's assassination, and my grandfather was swept up in the nation's crisis.
After they killed Trujillo, my father was put in jail for a few days because they were having masses and religious rituals for Trujillo in church, and everyone was supposed to cooperate. And my father didn't take his car and say, here is my car to bring people to the church to honor Trujillo.
When I asked my mom why my grandfather didn't cooperate, she had this to say.
Because he didn't want to, because he knew that this was stupid, because he wasn't there. His body wasn't there. They were just trying to show, that people like him. And my father never liked Trujillo.
Following 2 general strikes calling for democratic elections, in December of 1962, the first free presidential election took place, and the people of the Dominican Republic elected the wildly popular Juan Bosch, a leftist who had lived in exile for 23 years. Although he was still too young to vote, Big Freddy describes what he felt following the election of Bosch.
We were happy. I was happy. First of all, Juan Bosch has a style to talk to the people. He used to talk to the people in a manner so that people understand about everything. If he's going to talk about economy, he will give an example of something simple that the people could understand. And everybody would listen to in the radio, even though they don't have it in my house, well, everybody could listen to that. So we had a feeling of freedom to begin with, to don't be afraid anymore.
After just 7 months in office, however, Bosch was unseated by a coup led by an army colonel who had helped Trujillo's family flee the country after he was assassinated. Bosch's government was replaced by a 3-man military council, sending Bosch back into exile. A year and a half later, a second military coup removed the military council from power, demanding the restoration of Juan Bosch. Just 4 days later, the United States government invaded the Dominican Republic. They sent 42,000 troops to occupy the country in support of the anti-Bosch forces. The U.S. did not want another Cuba in the Western Hemisphere, and left-leaning administrations, democratically elected or not, needed to be stamped out. The U.S. invasion sparked a dangerous period where civilians and organized rebel forces engaged in urban guerrilla warfare against the U.S. Marine troops on the streets of the capital, Santo Domingo. Families fled the violence to towns outside of the capital, including to my grandparents' home, as my mother recalled.
I remember my house having refugees. Like, there were like 2-3 families at the time staying there because they couldn't go back to their house in the capital.
Friends?
Family and friends.
Because of the fighting.
Mm-hmm. Some houses were occupied, and some were occupied by the revolution, and some were occupied by the military.
The revolution that she is referring to were the various radical organizations that were standing up to the U.S. occupation and their interference in Dominican politics. These organizations included the MPD, the Dominican Popular Movement, which several of Freddie's family members were a part of, including Freddie's mother, Fabiola, who was deeply involved in the revolution.
Okay, when I met Fabiola, right, I get more exposed to the MPD, el Movimiento Popular Dominicano, and that was supposed to be a communist group.
What was their ideology?
They were Marxists. About politics, she always was involved about anything that had to do with the Communist Party, and I was happy to have been dating somebody that was that progressive, because she was very progressive. I don't know that, but I also think she was member of the Federación Mujeres Dominicanas, FMD, the Federation of Dominican Women.
It was a time of fervent revolutionary principles that extended even to the realms of culture and music. Big Freddie remembers friends calling each other out on being influenced by American culture.
Today, the United States was penetrating in all ways, the Dominican Republic. In fact, they was giving like milk, cheese, and cracker, whatever, through the United States. Some of the radical guys said that was the penetration. Also, remember the American music. Some of the radical guys didn't want to listen to American music because that's a cultural penetration, which I don't know how deep that was.
I don't know. How was it? Did you like American music?
Oh, very much.
That's penetrated.
I remember Chubby Checker.
Chubby Checker aside, the United States did eventually exert a strong pull on both my mother and Freddie's parents, who left the Dominican Republic and emigrated to New York, but for very different reasons and along varying paths. After graduating from college, my mother worked as a teacher in one of the most prestigious private schools in the Dominican Republic. But in July 1970, She resigned from that position and came to the U.S. on her tourist visa, but with every intention to stay. In 1974, she returned to the Dominican Republic to apply for her green card in order to become a permanent U.S. resident. Hedging her bets while back on the island, she applied for and landed a great job at the Dominican Telephone Company. Before she could even start in that role, she received a call from the U.S. Embassy in the Dominican Republic to interview for her residency application. They questioned why she would want to immigrate to the United States.
You had a nice life here. You graduated college. You have a nice job. Why you want to leave? Because I want to go to the United States and have a different life. And, somehow my vision was that there was not much advancement there for people if they were not in politics. Eventually, I probably would have gotten in politics. But to me, it was like, it was a dead end. Because this was a country that wasn't developing the way it should be developing.
Her application was approved, and she returned to the U.S. to her job in a factory ironing ties in Queens. Both Big Freddie and Fabiola, on the other hand, had pressing reasons to leave for the United States. In 1967, Fabiola gave birth to her first son, Guido, whose father was also very involved in revolutionary politics, with a group that splintered from the MPD, known as the Proletariat Voice.
Guido's father, he was part of that group, and that group later on accused him of being a CIA agent. And then Romana, when he went to see Guido, they kidnapped him and took him to the university and killed him. And it was a time that they were accusing Fabiola of being part of that, and she denied that. She suffered a lot. They went after her. They put her in jail. A lot of things for that.
Violence within the revolutionary movement for people suspected of being CIA operatives was a reality. And so was the continued repression of and violence against political dissidents by the government of Joaquín Balaguer. Balaguer was elected president in 1966. No newcomer to politics, he had for decades served under Trujillo's tutelage in various administrative posts. Like Trujillo, he had little tolerance for political opponents or left-wing revolutionaries. It is estimated that in the first 12 years of his presidency, 11,000 people were tortured or murdered by his regime. It was during the same period that both Fabiola and Big Freddie began to think that they were under surveillance by the state or those aligned with the right-wing Balaguer administration. Big Freddie told me a story about a time he was visiting Fabiola that made him suspect that they were under surveillance.
And when I was visiting her, I saw a guy at the corner kind of looking back to where she was living, and I was there. So either I become paranoid or something. We thought that the guy was, looking to us there. So, but I left. I remember I took a cab later on and I went home. And I spoke to a friend of mine about that. And later on, they sent a note to his mother, letting her know that he shouldn't be associating with me because I was associating with somebody, with Fabiola. To me, it was somebody from the right wing. They think that's what I feel, was a threat that I was getting associated with somebody who attend to the state security.
Fabiola was considered a threat to the status quo.
Listen, during that time, they was killing a lot of people. I was scared. The mother of my friend was scared.
What about Fabiola?
She maybe was concerned.
Concerned? What exactly were her nerves made of? She may not have been scared, but Big Freddie and his parents were downright terrified. Following that episode, they wanted to send him to a small town away from the capital to hide out.
I didn't want to go to a little town. They want to send me to hide out there. So we stayed home. So my parents decided, I think we had to get out of the country. So a group of friends of mine got together. Some of them said, no, don't do that. Don't worry about it. But some said, yeah, if you had to go, you had to go. So I was coming over here only for 1 year and then come back after the whole thing passed. So that came to avoid whatever persecution could happen.
Fabiola and Big Freddy decided it was time to leave for New York City. In December 1970, Big Freddy came on a student visa, which he had earlier obtained as part of a Catholic student group. Fabiola arrived 6 months later with the passport of her sister, who had a tourist visa. She replaced her sister's passport picture with a picture of herself. In April 1972, they welcomed the birth of my partner, Fred Ones. Eventually, they settled in Brooklyn and enrolled in 1975 at Pratt University as engineering students. Life was challenging for the young parents. Big Freddy, in retrospect, seemed proud that despite the challenges at the predominantly white institution, they persevered in these early days.
Because we did that with all the difficulty that somebody could have. Remember, we didn't master the language. We didn't have the legal support to be doing that. And I also remember that talking about the language, that one time when I was taking, I don't know if it was American history or literacy, that I told the teacher, I can't understand this. I don't know how to answer that. And the teacher told me, get out of the classroom if you don't know English. So I said, I'm going to stay here. Even if I failed the course, but why do I have to get out?
The lack of legal support Big Freddy mentions is the fact that both he and Fabiola were undocumented at the time. Eventually, with a desire to adjust their status to a legal one, they enlisted the help of a lawyer who advised them to apply for permanent residency as parents of a U.S. citizen. He insisted that they apply at the U.S. consulate in Mexico. He cautioned that if they applied in the Dominican Republic and failed to get approval, they would not be able to come back to the United States. Fabiola balked at that advice, so in 1977, they went to the Dominican Republic. Fabiola's son Guido, who had been living there for the past 10 years with family, also needed a green card. At the consulate, the wait was long.
We noticed that we wait and wait and wait and wait, and everybody left the consulate, only she and I. So here came a guy, he was a white guy, and he said, I will get Guido there with brother, because he also need to get the paper. He and that child, you could visit them, they could get the resident, but she stay here because she attend to the security of the United States.
She threatened the security of the United States? Uh-oh. The lawyer was right. Fabiola was stuck. Stay tuned for what happened next in part 2 of Excursions, Dominican Republic edition.